Growing up, I've always looked forward to going to the airport to wait for my father, instead of sitting down for regular dinner conversations. For you to know, he is an OFW, like overseas Filipino worker, and he is working far from home just so our family can have a better life. But if I'm being honest, we were never really close. We were never really that close. And the distance wasn't just about kilometers or time zones. It became emotional too. Our conversations were short, sometimes awkward, and most of the time, I knew him. I knew him more as a provider than as a parent. And that is sad. And I think that's one of the hidden struggles of many children of OFWs. Behind the stories of those sacrifices are stories of silence, disconnection, and the kind of loneliness you can always put into words. That's why today, I want to share not just my story, but also how the struggles of OFWs connect with the bigger issues we face as Filipinos, like poverty, education, and corruption. Mabuhay! Blessed be God forever! Hi everyone! I am Cristel, a grade 12 STEM student of Mother Sebastiana, and welcome to the first episode of Crystallize. That is the title of my podcast, where we discuss how the current situation in our country has affected the lives of every Filipinos. Let's start with poverty. My father didn't leave because he wanted to travel the world. He left because his salary here wasn't enough to sustain us. And that's the reality for many Filipinos, especially for the OFWs. Like poverty and lack of opportunities here in our country, it pushes our parents, relatives, and our kababayan to work abroad. As a student, I see how poverty affects not just families like mine, but also my classmates, my schoolmates. When I was in elementary school, I came from a public school, and some of my classmates and my schoolmates, they skipped school because they didn't have money for fare or money for baon. Some shared one book among 3 students. Others dropped out completely because they had to help their families first before themselves. Before they help their family first before their education. And poverty is like a chain. It doesn't affect one generation. It pulls down the next. For me, it meant growing up without a father at home. For others, it means growing up without the chance to even finish school. And until poverty is addressed, the cycle continues. Parents leave, children struggle, and families leave with sacrifices that never should have been necessary. Poverty is one of the reasons why families are torn apart and the reason why some dreams are delayed. When people call OFWs our bagong bayani or our modern day heroes, I feel 2 things. First, pride. Because I know my father works so hard just to give us a chance at a better life. But second, sadness. Because I also know what it costs us as a family. You see, my father and I aren't really close. It's not like in the movies where kids cry and hug their parents at the airport with dramatic music. For me, the distance didn't just mean being in different countries. It meant not having the kind of relationship I sometimes wished for. Our conversations were short. Sometimes it felt like we didn't know each other well. And I think that's something a lot of children of OFWs don't say out loud. We're grateful, but we're also affected by the silence, the gaps, and the feeling that our parent is both present and absent at the same time. Instead of kwentuhan, we had phone calls that dropped because of weak internet. Instead of sharing meals, I got updates from my uncles and my mama about my father. And over time, I realized that love doesn't always translate into closeness. As a student, this shaped me in ways I didn't expect. I learned to be independent. I had to handle things at home, sometimes even decisions, because my father wasn't there. I need to help my mother to decide, and some of my classmates had their parents helping them with the assignments, but I mostly relied on myself. Sometimes it feels heavy, but it also made me resilient. And yet, deep down, I know why this is happening. It's not that my father wanted to be away. He didn't wake up one day and decide, I want to miss my child's growing up years. He was forced by poverty and by the lack of opportunities here in the Philippines. If jobs here paid fairly, if life here was sustainable, maybe he wouldn't have had to live. Maybe we could have had those ordinary moments like dinner table conversations, arguments about curfews, or simple father-daughter bonding. But instead, we traded presents for survival. And I know I am not the only one. I've met so many students, friends with the same story. Some of them even say they feel like they're growing up with a stranger. And that's true. And others feel pressure to succeed because every grade they get seems to measure whether their parents' sacrifice is worth it. And that's the hidden struggle of OFWs, not just the homesickness they feel abroad, but the distance, pressure, and emotional toll and the families they leave behind. And in the end, all of this traces back to the same root cause, like poverty, the broken system here in our country. As a student, I've always been told that education is key to success, and I believe that it is, but sometimes that key feels like it doesn't fit the lock. I've seen schools that lack classrooms, a classroom where the roof leaks when it rains. I've also seen back then where teachers are spending their own money just to buy chalk, markers, or bond paper, or anything that will help their classrooms feel like a learning center for their students. Back then, when I was in elementary, I saw some students who wanted to study hard but couldn't because they had to work to help their parents or take care of their siblings while their parents were abroad or working. Even I feel the pressure. Knowing my father works so hard abroad, I carry the weight of his sacrifices on my shoulders. I study not just for myself, but because I don't want his hard work to go to waste. Education should break the cycle of poverty. But the way the things are, it sometimes feel like we're just running in circles. Quality education isn't equally accessible. And when students don't get the education they deserve, poverty doesn't end. It just transfers from parents to children, from generation to generation. And when I hear the word corruption, I used to think it was just something for adults to talk about politicians, money, scandals. But the more I look around as a student, the more I realize corruption reaches us too. For example, why do some schools still not have enough classrooms, even when the government says education is a priority?
Nakakapikon po kasi meron pong bilyon-bilyong kinokorap yung mga pamilya, yung mga contractors, pero bakit kami po sa edukasyon ay binabansot? Mag-8 years na po yata na hindi natatayo, hindi binubuksan, ay dahil under din siya sa mga diskaya, under din siya sa DPWH. Doon po bad trip pa mga scholar ng bayan dahil patuloy pong kinukupot yung mga batayang serbisyo sa edukasyon.
Why do teachers struggle with low pay when we know there's supposed to be a budget? Why do students have to share old textbooks or sit on the floor because there aren't enough chairs?
So 120 kayo lahat?
Ba't mo pinapakopya sa kanila yun?
Kasi isa lang yung aklat namin.
Ansag! Ansag! Minsan rin po nahirapan po sa mga subject kapag di po napagpun sa gabi. Dahil sa sobra pong antok.
And it's not just in schools. Look at the hospitals where patients wait for hours because there aren't enough doctors or equipment. Or disaster relief where families lose their homes and yet the help promised to them never arrives. All of these are signs of corruption. It's frustrating because while leaders are busy filling their own pockets, ordinary Filipinos are the ones who suffer. Families who can't get proper health care, students who drop out because education isn't supported, workers who are forced to leave their families just to survive. Imagine if the money that's being stolen was actually used for what it's meant. Maybe more families could stay together. Maybe more students could finish school. Maybe fewer people would have to leave the country just to earn a living. And the hardest part is how normal corruption has become. People say, ganyan talaga sa Pilipinas. Like, it's just something we have to accept. But I don't want to accept it because every peso stolen is a stolen opportunity for us. Every act of corruption is another reason why poverty continues, why education suffers, and why families are forced apart. As a student, I know I can't solve corruption by myself, but I also know it starts with us, by not cheating in exams, by being honest even when it's hard, and not taking shortcuts. If we grow up choosing honesty, maybe we won't repeat the same mistakes. Because if corruption doesn't end, everything else, like poverty, OFWs living, broken schools, will just keep going. But if we start changing the culture, the tradition now, maybe we can build a future where students don't have to feel robbed of their dreams. And after everything I've shared about poverty, the struggles of OFWs, the challenges in education, and the effects of corruption, I realized that all of these issues are connected. They are not just some scenarios we see in movies or series, or what we see in the news, or topics we study in class. They are real and they shape the way we live every single day. For me, these issues are personal. Poverty is the reason why my father had to work abroad. Being a student, I've seen how education can change lives, but also how it's held back by corruption and lack of support. And I know that my story isn't unique. There are millions of families like mine, each carrying their own versions of these struggles. But even with all these challenges, I still believe there's hope. I see it in the resilience of families who keep going despite hardships. I see it in students who study hard under the dim light of a candle because they believe education will give them a better future. But even with all these challenges, I still believe there's hope. I see it in the resilience of families who keep going despite hardships. I see it in the students who study under the dim light of a candle because they believe education will give them a better future. I see it in the teachers who continue to teach with passion even if they don't have all the resources they need. Change won't happen overnight, and as a student, I know I can't fix the system alone. But I believe change starts with awareness, with conversations like this, and with small acts of honesty and courage. If we choose to care, to be informed, and to demand better, then little by little, the cycle can break. At the end of the day, I hold on to this. We are not just victims of these problems. We can also be part of the solution. Just like what Dr. Jose Rizal said, kabataan ang pag-asa ng bayan. And yes, we, the new generation, have the power to change the system in our country, especially now that more people are open to change and more people are namulat na sa katotohanan. So to everyone listening, especially to my fellow students, especially to my fellow Sienans, let's not lose hope. Our voices matter. Our choices matter. And our future is still in our hands. We can still change our system. Mabuhay, and thank you for joining me in this conversation. See you on to the next.
One is the loneliest number that you'll